The 1882 Chinese Expulsion Act. On the 28th of October, 1886, the U.S. President, Grover Cleveland, led a dedicated ceremony to celebrate the unveiling of the Statue of Liberty on Liberty Island in New York Harbor. The 151-foot-high statue had been gifted to the United States by France as a solemn reminder of the aid the European country had given to the U.S. during the American War of Independence over 100 years earlier. Several years later, a poem entitled New Colossus, written by the French poet Emma Lazarus, was added to it. This includes the famous lines, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." These lines are symbolic of America's welcoming of immigrants throughout its history. But unbeknownst to many people, just a few years before the Statue of Liberty was dedicated in 1882, the U.S. government had prohibited an entire people from entering and settling in the United States. The Chinese Expulsion Act was passed into law in 1882 by the administration of President Chester A. Arthur. This effectively banned entirely the immigration of Chinese people into the United States. The Chinese American population had been growing in the second half of the 19th century as large cities began to emerge on the west coast of America at sites such as Los Angeles and San Francisco. This community made a significant contribution to the economy of California and the wider west of America in the 1850s, 1860s, and 1870s, not least in laboring to build the Transcontinental Railroad, which united the east coast of America with the burgeoning settlements in the west. However, Chinese settlement had also resulted in public outcries to curb immigration. This was not entirely new in American life. The huge influx of Irish settlers in the 1840s had seen deep tensions emerge in New York, Boston, and several other East Coast cities about the growing Irish American community. There was similar unrest about the arrival of hundreds of thousands of Italians to America between 1870s and 1890s. However, no legislation was introduced to curb the arrival of these European settlers. As such, the Chinese Exclusion Act was a unique act of exclusion. It was initially intended that it would only last for 10 years. But when the original embargo on Chinese inward migration expired in 1892, a new act, known as the Geary Act, was introduced, which extended it for another 10 years to 1902. Thereafter, it was extended indefinitely, until it was finally repealed in 1943 via the Magnuson Act, a symbolic act of solidarity with the people of China during a period when the Chinese and the U.S. were allied in Eastern Asia against the Empire of Japan during the Second World War. Nevertheless, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 stands as one of the darker moments in U.S. history. In 2011 and 2012, the two separate houses of the U.S. Congress passed motions formally expressed regret for the Exclusion Act and acknowledged the contribution of the Chinese American community to the development of the United States.